Hello, and welcome back to another video to fall asleep to. In this video, we will be talking about World War I. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. 1914. Europe is wealthy, technologically advanced, and deeply interconnected. People genuinely believe that humanity has outgrown massive continental wars. But beneath the surface, Europe was a powder keg of competing empires, massive arms races, and tangled alliances. All it needed was a spark. On June 28, 1914, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip provided it. Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, during a visit to Sarajevo. It was a tragic, localized, political murder. But because of the complex web of treaties tying Europe's powers together, this single act dragged the entire planet into the deadliest conflict humanity had ever seen. This wasn't just a war. It was the birth of the modern, mechanized world, delivered through fire, mud, and steel. Today, we are walking through the timeline, the tactics, and the staggering human cost of the First World War. To understand how a murder in the Balkans started a world war, we have to look at the alliances. Europe was divided into two main camps, the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. After the assassination, Austria-Hungary wanted to crush Serbia, but Serbia was backed by Russia. Austria-Hungary looked to its powerful ally, Germany, who essentially handed them a blank check of military support. When Russia mobilized its massive army to protect Serbia, Germany declared war on Russia. Because France was allied with Russia, Germany declared war on France too. In just over a month, the dominoes had fallen. Germany faced a nightmare, a two-front war against Russia in the east and France in the west. Their solution was the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to quickly invade France through neutral Belgium, capture Paris, knock France out of the war, and then rush their troops east to fight the slower mobilizing Russians. But reality rarely survives contact with the enemy. The Belgians fought back fiercely, slowing the Germans down, and by invading neutral Belgium, Germany dragged the British Empire into the war. The early months of the war were highly mobile and unimaginably bloody. Generals were using 19th-century tactics, massed infantry charges and cavalry, against 20th-century weapons. Machine guns and rapid-fire artillery changed the math of warfare overnight. A single machine gunner could mow down dozens of charging men in seconds. By late 1914, both sides realized that staying above ground meant certain death, so they started to dig. By the winter of 1914, a continuous line of trenches stretched from the Swiss border all the way to the North Sea coast of Belgium. This was the Western Front, and for the next 4 years, it barely moved. Life in the trenches was a unique kind of hell. It wasn't just the enemy you were fighting the environment. The trenches were infested with rats the size of cats. Millions of fleas and lice carried trench fever. And the mud. It was everywhere. Soldiers stood in freezing, contaminated water for days. This caused trench foot, a condition where the flesh on the feet would literally die and rot away, often requiring amputation. To break this brutal stalemate, scientists and engineers raced to invent new, terrifying ways to kill. World War I saw the debut of modern industrial warfare. 1916 brought two of the bloodiest battles in human history. At Verdun, the Germans launched a massive offensive designed not to capture territory, but simply to bleed France white. It lasted 300 days and resulted in over 700,000 casualties. To relieve the pressure on Verdun, the British and French launched the Battle of the Somme. On the very first day of the Somme, July 1, 1916, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties. It remains the bloodiest single day in the history of the British military. By the time the battle ended months later, over 1 million men had been killed or wounded, and the front line had moved barely a few miles. Because we often focus so heavily on the mud of the Western Front, it's easy to forget that this was a world war. On the Eastern Front, the war between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia was vastly different. It was mobile, fought across massive expanses of territory. The Russian army was enormous but poorly equipped, often sending men into battle without rifles. Despite early victories, they suffered devastating losses. In the Middle East, the British fought the Ottoman Empire, allied with Germany. They famously backed the Arab Revolt, utilizing guerrilla tactics to disrupt Ottoman supply lines. Meanwhile, in the freezing mountains of the Alps, Italian and Austro-Hungarian troops fought a brutal, high-altitude war, where avalanches were sometimes as deadly as artillery. But the war that ultimately shifted the balance of power took place on the ocean. Britain used its massive navy to blockade Germany, slowly starving the German population of food and resources. In desperation, Germany unleashed unrestricted submarine warfare. Their U-boats sank merchant ships and passenger liners heading to Britain. In 1915, a German U-boat sank the British ocean liner RMS Lusitania, killing 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. This enraged the United States, which had been strictly neutral. 2 years later, in 1917, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, a secret message from Germany proposing an alliance with Mexico against the U.S. Combined with Germany resuming unrestricted submarine warfare, this was the final straw. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. 1917 was a pivotal year. Just as the fresh American troops were preparing to enter the war, the Allies lost their eastern partner. Russia collapsed into revolution. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power and pulled Russia out of the war entirely. For Germany, this was a massive opportunity. With the Eastern Front closed, they moved millions of troops to the west. They knew they had a very short window to win the war before millions of fresh American soldiers arrived. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched a massive all-or-nothing offensive. They broke the trench stalemate and pushed perilously close to Paris. But they overextended themselves. Their supply lines broke down, and their soldiers were exhausted and starving. The Allies, now bolstered by hundreds of thousands of American troops, launched the 100 Days Offensive. Using coordinated attacks of infantry, tanks, aircraft, and creeping artillery barrages, they pushed the German army back toward its own borders. Germany's allies began to crumble. Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and finally Austria-Hungary all surrendered. Inside Germany, facing starvation and military defeat, sailors mutinied, and the Kaiser was forced to abdicate. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, an armistice, a ceasefire, went into effect. The guns finally fell silent. The cost of World War I is almost impossible to comprehend. Roughly 10 million military personnel died. Another 20 million were wounded, many left with horrific physical and psychological scars. Millions of civilians died from starvation, disease, and military action. The map of the world was entirely redrawn. 4 massive empires, the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman, ceased to exist. In 1919, the victorious nations met in Paris to hash out a peace treaty. The resulting Treaty of Versailles was deeply flawed. It placed the entire blame for the war on Germany, imposing massive financial reparations, stripping away its territory, and severely limiting its military. Many historians argue that rather than securing a lasting peace, the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles simply planted the seeds of resentment and economic ruin in Germany. Seeds that a man named Adolf Hitler would exploit just 2 decades later. World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Instead, it was the tragedy that set the stage for the rest of the 20th century. It taught us how to destroy each other on an industrial scale, but it failed to teach us how to prevent it. Thank you for watching. History isn't just about dates and battles. It's about understanding the decisions that shaped the world we live in today. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which historical event we should cover next.